we're coming to the close of this conversation today, which has been fascinating, but there's one last question I'd like to pose to you. Now, a major focus of our series here, Machiavelli in the Ivory Tower, is to bridge the gap between various forms of scholarship and policymaking. Now, you are a nuclear scientist by training, but as you show in your book, on your various trips to the DPRK, you've also benefited tremendously from the expertise of various colleagues who specialized and had intimate knowledge of the DPRK's culture, history, politics, or indeed who had firsthand experience actually negotiating with the North Koreans. So I do want to ask you what these communities, the sort of scientific and technical community, and then those who study sort of the politics and the society of those countries of concern, what they can learn from each other, and sort of what forms of knowledge exchange and communication between those communities you found to be particularly useful, what kind of approaches work, and perhaps which ones don't work so well.
Yeah, again, that's an excellent question. I would say that since I've done much of this interaction, in the international scene, as I mentioned, the many trips to Russia, to China, and so even early on, before I had the benefit of having good colleagues that understood the diplomatic part, I began to learn how important the cultural aspects, the human dimensions, the history was. And so with Russia, I really got into that. And actually, it was my Russian scientific colleagues that helped me, because in my own view is sort of the average Russian, and certainly the average Russian nuclear specialist, has so much better appreciation for history and culture and the arts and everything than we do in the United States. They certainly had much more than I had. And so I learned through those interactions, particularly from the Russians, also somewhat from the Chinese, but more from the Russians, how important those things are. And so then, knowing that, I was able to take advantage of the knowledge of a John Lewis, the knowledge of a Bob Carlin, and others who knew so much more. Carlin's been to North Korea more than 30 times. And he's worked with them much more closely. So he understood that better. But they were absolutely key to my being able to then work on integrating the technical and the diplomatic and the policy and the human dimensions. So I've thought a lot about how does one do that? How do we make sure that the next technical generation, when it goes over there, has a similar sense of the importance of that? And the diplomats have a better sense and appreciation for the importance of the technical interplay of those. And I would say my best answer to that is to say, how did I get to North Korea in the first place? Well, let me tell you, it's not because I wanted to go to North Korea. That was not on my travel list. It was also not on my wife's travel list. She said, okay, Russia, I've got news to, but North Korea. But anyway, the way I got to North Korea is John Lewis asked me to go with him. And so John Lewis, if you go back now, and the lesson that I think is important for the future, John Lewis was a China specialist at Stanford. And it was in the late 80s that John Lewis, the political scientist, got together with Professor Sid Drell, one of the best physicists in this country. And they decided that that's what is needed, the marriage of the scientific and the political science and diplomatic aspects. And they created the institution that I was at for 17 years, the Center for International Security and Cooperation. Actually, initially it was called Center for Arms Control and Cooperation. It stays the same acronym of CSAC. They are the ones that brought that together. And from the beginning of that center, what they did was to marry the diplomacy and the technical. So when John Lewis had been to North Korea, I think 8 times before 2004, when he asked me to come along. And through that interaction with Sid Drell and then Bill Perry at that time, Secretary Bill Perry, who's a card-carrying applied mathematician in addition to former secretary. So then John Lewis asked me to come along because it was already in his makeup that you want to bring a technical person along. So I think the lesson, so when we look at places like our center here, the CNS, bring the technical and bring the policy people together. And of course, what I'm really pleased I came here, you have technical people and you, of course, really have the policy expertise. And so that's what I would say, whether it's sort of an NGO organization or whether it's a university, try from the beginning, try from the very early years to have them understand that there is a marriage of the technical and the policy aspects that in the end is what's necessary to do good policy for the country.